She grew up with a lion in her house. Not a toy, not a nickname, an actual lion, living inside her home like a family pet. And that wasn't even the strangest part of her childhood. At just 14 years old, she fell in love with a 22-year-old man, and that relationship would follow her for the rest of her life. By her late 20s, she had the fame, the awards, and the kind of face every magazine wanted on its cover. She was, for a moment, the most talked-about woman in Hollywood. But somewhere between the spotlight and the scandals, she disappeared. Not all at once. Slowly, quietly. So what actually happened to her? And why does almost nobody talk about it now? Let's find out. Melanie Griffith was born on August 9th, 1957, right into the middle of Hollywood royalty. Her mother was Tippi Hedren, the famous blonde actress from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and her father, Peter Griffith, was a former child actor who later became an advertising executive. But growing up around fame came with a heavy price. Her parents divorced when she was only 9 months old, so from the very beginning, her childhood looked nothing like a normal one. Much of her early life was spent on film sets or surrounded by powerful people in the industry, especially after her mother became closely connected to Hitchcock himself. According to Tippi, that relationship became intense and even controlling, and the tension from it spilled over into their family life, leaving marks that lasted for years. As a teenager, Melanie was beautiful, sensitive, and a little rebellious. She started modeling at just 9 years old and began acting while she was still in her teens. Then, at only 14, she met a 22-year-old actor named Don Johnson on a film set where her mother was also working. That meeting would start a relationship that shaped much of her early adult life, for better and for worse. Most people only know Melanie Griffith from her biggest, most famous roles. What fewer people talk about is just how chaotic and uncertain the years before those roles really were. Her very first step into film came in the early 1970s, when she made her screen debut in a small, low-budget drama that barely anyone noticed at the time. It wasn't a big splash, but it was a start. A few years later, she landed a small yet memorable role in Arthur Penn's stylish thriller night, Moves, in 1975. These early parts didn't turn her into a star overnight, and they didn't come with fame or big paychecks. But they did something just as important. They put her name on the radar of the right people in the industry. Looking back, these small roles were the quiet beginning of something much bigger, a signal that Melanie Griffith had something special, even if the world hadn't fully noticed. Yet one of the most important moments in Melanie Griffith's early career came in 1984, with a film called Body Double, directed by Brian De Palma. The movie was dark, strange, and full of tension, built around themes of obsession and watching people without them knowing. Melanie played Holly Body, a woman caught in the middle of a murder mystery, in a role that was bold, uncomfortable, and layered with meaning. It would have been easy for an actor to get lost in a part like that, but Melanie handled it with surprising control and confidence. There's something almost poetic about this role, too. Her own mother, Tippi Hedren, had once dealt with a controlling, obsessive director in Alfred Hitchcock. Now here was Melanie, playing a character trapped inside a story built around obsession, in a film clearly inspired by Hitchcock's style. Critics were divided about the movie itself. Some loved it, some didn't. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Melanie Griffith was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just another small role anymore. This felt like the beginning of something real. 2 years later, in 1986, Melanie Griffith took on a role that would show just how wide her range really was. The film was called Something Wild, directed by Jonathan Demme, and it was unlike anything she had done before. She played Lulu, a free-spirited, unpredictable woman who convinces a shy, uptight man, played by Jeff Daniels, to join her on a spontaneous road trip. What starts off playful and fun slowly turns into something much darker and more dangerous. The role gave Melanie space to be completely different from scene to scene. Funny one moment, unsettling the next. It was a performance that surprised a lot of people and proved she wasn't just another pretty face in Hollywood. The film blended comedy with a slow, creeping sense of danger and once again, Melanie was right at the center of it, holding the whole story together. Before Melanie Griffith became a household name, she took a strange little detour into science fiction with a film called Cherry 2000. It was released in 1987, though it had actually been filmed a couple of years earlier. The movie followed a dusty, broken-down future, and Melanie played a tough, leather-clad tracker who guides a man through a dangerous zone in search of his malfunctioning robot companion. Yes, that's really what the movie was about. It had rocket launchers, desert chases, and a strange mix of action and quirky humor that made it feel completely different from anything else she had done. The film never became a big box office hit, but over time it found its own small group of loyal fans who loved it for exactly how weird and different it was. Then in 1988, everything changed. Melanie Griffith took on the role that would define her career, playing Tess McGill in Working Girl, an ambitious secretary from Staten Island with big dreams and an even bigger personality. Audiences fell in love with her instantly. She was funny, raw, and completely believable, the kind of character people could actually relate to. The film was packed with talent from top to bottom. Sigourney Weaver played her sharp, calculating boss, clearly enjoying every second of the role. Harrison Ford, one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, stepped back and let the story shine instead of trying to dominate it. And the supporting cast was just as strong, with a young Alec Baldwin, a scene-stealing Joan Cusack, and even a brief, memorable appearance from Kevin Spacey. Everyone brought their best to this film, and it showed. Working Girl wasn't just entertaining. It also captured the feeling of the corporate world in the 1980s, big shoulder pads, typewriters, and all. Even now, the pacing and heart of the film hold up surprisingly well. For her performance, Melanie won a Golden Globe and earned an Academy Award nomination. Almost overnight, she went from being seen as a scandalous young actress to one of Hollywood's brightest rising stars. After the success of Working Girl, Melanie Griffith became something more than just a talented actress. She became a symbol of a new kind of stardom, one built on charm and honesty rather than perfection. She wasn't cold or distant like some of the leading ladies before her. She had a raspy voice, a warm smile, and just enough mystery in her eyes to keep people curious. In a decade obsessed with looking flawless, she felt real, and that made her stand out even more. Magazines couldn't get enough of her. She was constantly in the news, constantly being talked about, and constantly landing roles that pushed her in new directions. For a while, it seemed like nothing could slow her down. In 1990, Melanie Griffith starred in Pacific Heights, playing one half of a young couple who buy a beautiful old house in San Francisco, only to make the mistake of renting a room to a dangerously unstable tenant. The film was tense and unsettling, and Melanie's performance grounded the story, playing someone exhausted and overwhelmed rather than just a simple victim. It quietly became one of her more underrated performances. That same year, she took on a much bigger project, Bonfire of the Vanities, based on a best-selling novel and filled with major stars. It should have been a huge success. Instead, it became one of the most talked-about failures in Hollywood, torn apart by critics and audiences alike. Melanie's performance was brave, but it got lost in the disaster around it. For the first time, people began wondering if her momentum was starting to slow down, by the early 1990s, Melanie Griffith's personal life had started to overshadow her career. She had always been open, sometimes painfully open, about her long struggle with addiction to alcohol and drugs. This wasn't just wild Hollywood behavior. For her, it was something much more serious, a real battle she fought for years. She entered rehab for the first time in 1988, right after Working Girl came out, but recovery wasn't simple or straightforward. Over the next 2 decades, she returned to treatment more than once. Each time, the news would focus less on her work and more on her appearance and her personal problems. The press could be harsh, sometimes cruel, mocking how she looked or spoke. But unlike many stars who hid their struggles, Melanie didn't. She spoke honestly about her lapses and showed up looking tired and human. That honesty made her more relatable, but it also made her an easy target. Melanie Griffith's personal life was just as eventful as her career. She was married 4 times, twice to Don Johnson, the same man she had first met as a teenager. But her longest and most talked about relationship was with Spanish actor Antonio Banderas. The two met while filming a romantic comedy together in 1995, and even though both were married to other people at the time, their connection was impossible to ignore. By 1996, they had both filed for divorce and gotten married to each other. That same year, they welcomed a daughter together, named Stella. Melanie and Antonio stayed together for almost 20 years, which is rare in Hollywood, and for a long time they were seen as one of the industry's most solid couples. But like many relationships under constant public pressure, cracks eventually began to show. They quietly divorced in 2014, and even after separating, both continued to speak kindly and respectfully about one another as film roles became smaller and less frequent. Melanie Griffith found new ways to stay connected to acting. She returned to the stage, including a Broadway run in Chicago in 2003, where she played Roxy Hart. Critics who expected little from her were pleasantly surprised by how strong her performance actually was. Around the same time, her daughter, Dakota Johnson, began building her own successful acting career, eventually becoming a major star in her own right. Melanie also remained close with her other children from her earlier marriages. Over the years, she opened up publicly about her health as well, including a history of seizures, which she said improved significantly once the stress from her second divorce finally began to fade. Melanie Griffith will probably never be remembered as the most careful or predictable actress Hollywood ever produced. But what she gave audiences, especially in her best moments, was something much harder to find. Honesty, vulnerability, a willingness to be messy in front of the whole world, even when it wasn't flattering. At her peak, she was magnetic and unpredictable, the kind of person you couldn't quite figure out but couldn't stop watching either. She made bold choices, paid a real price for some of them, and still found a way through the noise again and again. Her story isn't a simple one, and it was never meant to be neat or tidy. Maybe that's exactly why people still remember her. So the next time someone asks what really happened to Melanie Griffith, the truest answer might be this: she never really left. She just kept living, loudly, honestly on her own terms.